My journey into the world of Star Citizen has been something that has both surprised me and delighted me every time I've stepped into this game and into this world. And I do want to just continue to say thank you so much to the community who has been showing up and been helping me, providing me with resources, ways to kind of learn and dive deeper down this rabbit hole. So thank you so much if you guys have been a part of that journey. If you want to be a part of that as well, you can always check the links in the description for the Discord where you can jump in and we could talk about Star Citizen. We can also play it not in a streaming fashion. And that's one of the big reasons why I wanted to kind of jump into today's discussion topic, because this also comes from the community. Over the last couple days, David wrote a really interesting comment, and I thought that would be a perfect way to kind of jump into this conversation around what is a toxic player, at least from my perspective, but also to kind of continue to highlight the most important thing that I feel that these MMORPGs need, and it's player freedom. And I think there's a myth, a kind of in a way, a misconception about what is it to be a toxic player? What is it to have a toxic community? What does it would even truly mean? Because depending on where you're coming from, you could have a completely different experience. And my experience has been incredibly positive. And I wanted to just kind of wade in on this subject. You guys can always let me know how you feel. But let's dive into the video. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel. My name is Brian. If you happen to be new around here, if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for coming in to checking out today's video. Before we dive into the main subject, though, I want to talk to you guys kind of as a summary level what we're going to talk about in today's video. My view of what it means to be a toxic player, how did the community respond to toxicity, and then ultimately why the freedom aspect of these MMOs is more important than essentially trying to create safe spaces for people to enjoy online. But there's going to be a balance, because obviously you can go from toxic to harassment, and that's what we're going to explore in today's video. Also, if you guys are able to, check the links in the description. I have an upcoming show this Saturday in Fort Worth. The ticket link is down below. If you guys are curious, you can check out the flyer should be somewhere here on screen. And if you're in the area and you want to come see some adult driven, not safe for work comedy, I really hope that you come by and check out the show. I also have an upcoming one on the 23rd, and we'll be promoting that here in just a little bit. Be sure to hit that like button. Check out the Instagram, as I'm trying to push to 1,000 followers over there. And if you guys like the content, that's a great way of supporting it for free. But let's kick it off with David's comment saying, about the community toxicity part, or lack thereof, in Star Citizen, I believe it's due to two factors. One, through that this is a sci-fi game, and it is actually a slow sci-fi game. It takes time to prepare, to travel, and to get your ship and so on. And because of that, usually the common toxic player is the type of player who wants instant and constant action. Star Citizen is not that type of game. And second, most of the people that originally or still back this game are quote-unquote the old guys, like you and me. Most are well above their 30s and 40s and even 50s, and also some reason why the game keeps being funded so well. 20-year-olds really don't have the financial capability to pour $500 billion into the project alone. We don't have time or patience to be toxic. And this is such a great kind of springboard into today's video. So I believe, and from my experience and my love of the MMORPG as a genre, I believe that every community has a toxic element. You could take this outside of games, like any kind of humanity. Like the reality is we're all sinners, we're all broken, and we all fail. Like I could maybe be considered a toxic player if I kind of succumb to that mindset. But that isn't to say that a community is toxic or isn't toxic. That really kind of blends into how they choose to engage that element. But David is right when it comes down to cost. If there is no cost to a player to be toxic, there is then the incentive to go in that direction. But we also want to keep in mind we need to incentivize the player's freedom to choose to kind of engage with that. Don't think of a toxic player as a pirate, for example. Think of a toxic player as somebody who is hell-bent on actually hurting the game, as opposed to essentially where I see a lot of people misconstrue toxicity as PvP, right? Like, oh, PvP is toxic because that other player beat me and made me realize maybe I'm not as skilled as I wish or I dream to be. Or when, video games are typically designed, they're built so that 70% of the time you win, and that in and of itself makes players get that dopamine. It makes them have that enjoyment. But when it's taken into a multiplayer aspect, that's where you start to see this. The other side of it, when it comes down to toxicity, I rarely, if ever, see it in game. Now, that's not to say that people aren't going to talk about and troll. I think trolls are different from toxic players. Where like as people see like global chat is so toxic. It's like, well, it really just kind of depends. Like if you're super sensitive and you're just not necessarily somebody who's got a lot of fortitude, I guess is probably the right word here. Yeah, you might be easily offended, and thus, yeah, an online chat room is going to give you those kind of vibes. There aren't no safe spaces on the internet, and whenever people try to create them, I think that actually creates a lot more toxicity in the end. Where I believe true toxic players, or that kind of label, comes to a head is actually more in social media than an actual game or in Star Citizen. Now, this last weekend, I was able to get some playtime in, and another player rammed our ship a couple of times, getting us killed. I actually don't think that player is a toxic player. That player is a space pirate. I'm not going to name him here, by the way. You can go watch the stream if you're interested. But that player, I have no animosity to. Like, in fact, like my reaction was just that of kind of pure joy and just like, wow, I can't believe that happened. That's wild. And that's the beauty of the player freedom, because we could restrict all of these player freedoms to snuff out toxic players, and in the end we just have another watered down piece of crap game that eventually people are just going to get bored on and move away from. How do we as a community respond to toxicity is the question that I always look at when I evaluate this discussion for any online game. Are toxic players, like, is the discussion like ignored, right? Where the response is like, there's no such thing as toxic players, our community is the best. Like, that's a red flag. Whenever I see people kind of take that hard line in the sand, I always want to try and champion is like, let's not deny it, let's shame it. Shame is a perfectly great tool, and in its sandbox MMORPGs, it is actually a much more powerful tool, because in a game where you cannot necessarily do all the things that you want to do, your reputation ends up preceding you. Your reputation ends up being something that you want to protect, or you want to have, again, a negative reputation is also some players' goals. And I want to encourage a community and a game that allows players to have that level of freedom to go in and do that. But where your reputation can suffer and thus your gameplay can suffer, there's a cost to your actions. And when the game has those natural kind of costs, and it also gives players the abilities to put out bounties and things like that. We're not going into like the concept of terms of service, because I don't fully yet understand all the terms of service that I've agreed to when I hit accept when playing this game. But I think essentially when I look at the overall community, if when I see a lot of people say like our community isn't toxic, there is no toxic, it's like, okay, well, I think what do you define by that? Because I think when you let that kind of element like exist in the shadows, it ends up something having a bigger corrosive, more damaging impact. Because if a new player's coming in and saying this is the most wholesome community that you've ever experienced, and then you realize that actually isn't true, I think that the shock is there. And I think if we as gamers recognize our own human failings in this whole thing, that's why going back to the social media kind of link is that when you typically see it is where there's no cost to in-game reputation. You can just anonymously post whatever you want. And that's why for me, like, I always kind of feel like it's important that I use my first name, that I kind of talk to you guys sometimes in the camera way, that I'm not some voiceless, faceless, gamer out there, that it's like, no, like, I want to be real. I want to be honest. I want to have this level of integrity that I'm going to bring to social media, that I don't expect that social media to kind of follow suit, but maybe somebody out there, chooses to watch the content and chooses to be like, you know what? I'm going to go and start listening to like other sources. I'm going to go get more information and feed my brain with more sources rather than these echo chambers that social media builds up. And I think that's where Toxic really thrives, and it lives on the forums, on, Twitter, on, Reddit. Like, that's where I typically see more of that element than actually in game, because even in a theme park MMO, there ends up being an in-game cost, or there can be, depending on the tools and features that are given to the player. Now, that's why I always want to incentivize player freedom and PvP, because PvP can always be that natural response to the community, kind of that, hey, we're gonna in a way, as a community of gamers, we're gonna self-police our game. We're gonna say, like, you know what, this action is acceptable, this action isn't acceptable, and here is where we're gonna go, all within the rules and bounds of a game. And I think that is what I feel has been missing in a lot of MMORPGs, but that is a core element, I think, to the success of a sandbox MMORPG, which at this time, that's what Star Citizen, is targeting. And I think that's the right call, especially with the support. Now, as to age, like, I think age isn't necessarily like, the full factor. Back to David's comment, I do think that he brings up a really good point, is that, like, I know I was a huge jerk until I was like 25. I was really selfish and self-centered and focused all on me. And then after 25, you kind of just realize, well, what are you doing here in this life? Like, are you really, like, are you just gonna make it all about you, or are you gonna like make it about something bigger than you, because we're all at some point not gonna be around. The idea here is that age can temper some of that aspect. Obviously the funding does temper some of that aspect, but I think it's a part that I want to make sure I differentiate player versus player, and the danger of what it is to do space combat from a toxic element of harassment, where essentially, like, where a player then is like, and this is just how it all comes to a head, and hopefully this video made sense, where a player is like, I'm going to do everything I can to get this person out of the game, because again, that hurts the game. And so for me, I define toxicity as actions that are deliberate to actually hurt the game and the game community, as opposed to playing within the bounds of the game's rules. And so far, I personally don't feel like I've experienced that at all in this game, and I've experienced it in other games. And that's where obviously the content creator versus gamer hats, I think, have to be worn, and I have to acknowledge that there are certain things that I, as a content creator, are taking on. There are benefits and there are disadvantages. And I think overall, there's no point in complaining about the disadvantages. Like, it's not like anybody's forcing me to make a video. So my goal is, I'm going to keep having fun. I think the experience that this community has shown me is a beautiful one. And from the reactions that I've seen from some people who've messaged me after having been rammed in game a couple times, or like, yeah, it's kind of being handled by the community. And that is a good sign, when the community in and of itself is the police, and I think that in and of itself is a good sign of it. Not to deny that it exists, but essentially to kind of say, like, here are the rules, right? And as long as we're kind of all working within the same kind of rule sets, having that kind of a hopefully similar or kind of fair playing ground, well, maybe next time I'll get I'll be better prepared and be able to defend myself. And that ends up becoming a beautiful thing of the drama and the complexity, and why I think these games are so special and so different. Anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. I hopefully didn't waste too much time. Thank you so much for being here. If you feel like it earns it, like, sub, share, comment below. Love to hear from you, or get involved in the Discord. And hopefully we'll be playing some more here this week. I can't guarantee stream time, as that is the life of as a parent and a husband. But I appreciate you guys taking time today to spend it with me. And hopefully you enjoyed the video, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. But until then, take care.